10-6 Life Factors, welcome Dr. Opara. And I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly.
Yes, sis.
Dr. Opara is a double board certified assistant professor of internal medicine and pediatrics at Wayne State University in Michigan. She is the associate program director of the Internal Medicine-Pediatric residency and the attending physician with Wayne State University Physician Group. Very busy, busy doctor here. She has won several awards and honor, for example, the African American Leadership Council Campaign of the Year, and so on. She's done numerous presentations on factors and issues impacting the Black communities, conducted several research about racism and white supremacy in the medical and health field. Her research has appeared in noted journals such as the International Journal of Academic Medicine. I am not doing enough here to capture all of what Dr. Opara has done. It is so many, it's extensive. She came to my attention because she's conducting these spaces on Twitter, which is overwhelmingly attended. I mean, there's a lot of people who are logging on. And so I'm very pleased. And it is my pleasure to welcome Dr. Opara to Life Factors. Welcome.
Thank you, sis. I really appreciate it. I'm so happy to be here.
Great. I know we couldn't capture all of what you've done, and I'm going to welcome people to look at your Twitter page and see all the wonderful things, because there's so many, and you're being recognized in your field of medicine, and that's where your your research lies in terms of what is happening to Black people, African American people of color, minority people in that field. And so I observed that you started what you call health, equity, and justice in medicine. Could you describe that for us?
Absolutely. And again, thank you for that very generous introduction. I like to always inform folks, that, and I'll say this, give you a little background of myself, and then we jump into the conversation, because it's important that you know who you're speaking with so that you understand why.
Yeah.
I do what I do. So as you have so beautifully said, my name is Ijeoma Nnodim Opara. Ijeoma means safe journey in Igbo, my mother tongue. I was born in Nigeria, in what is now known as Edo State, but Bendel State. My family migrated here when I was still a teenager to the US, Ann Arbor, Michigan specifically, where I went to University of Michigan, and then in Detroit for medical school, Wayne State University, and I stayed there and continued to practice as a physician. I'm double board certified in internal medicine and pediatrics, and I practice what I like to call liberation medicine, which is a medicine, a clinical practice that is founded in an ethos where Black folks are liberated, truly free and abundant. I emphasize joy, I emphasize the assets and strengths of our people, and really look through an Afrocentric lens in terms of our own liberation. I'm really intentional about, again, an Afrocentric lens. I'm really intentional about lifting up Black people and people of African descent. I'm also really intentional about emphasizing joy and abundance in our work. And so I think it's so important to really name that. I view anti-racism really as the pathway towards true liberation, where we are free from the shackles of white supremacy as it shows up in all aspects of life and society as a whole. So it's important, I think, to lay that foundation, because that really then informs why I do what I do. So as a physician, I'm a professor as well, an assistant professor at the School of Medicine, Wayne State. And in that capacity, as well as associate program director, as has been mentioned, of the Internal Medicine Residency program. In that capacity, I noticed a gap. And the gap was that we were kept on practicing medicine sort of in a purely biomedical way, meaning that only just really talking about diseases and people experiencing diseases and the cause of it being just like, again, what we call pathology, meaning there's some alteration in cells, there's some dysfunction in the tissues or in the organs or in the chemistry that makes up the body. But I understood very clearly as an African woman, and also as one who majored in African studies in undergrad and has done our community organizing and activism work for a long time, that no, the pathology that shows up in the body reflects the pathology within society, that people who are historically and continually oppressed and marginalized and disenfranchised are not going to be well. They're not going to be healthy. I mean, where has that ever been, right? And so we understand that these are diseases when we talk about health disparities, meaning that health experiences or the health outcomes of certain people are different from the other people. In fact, worse off than other people, not because of anything inherently wrong with their bodies, but because they are survivors of oppressive systems. And so it became very incumbent because upon me really in my capacity as a leader within my institution to help trainees understand that, help my colleagues, my fellow colleagues understand that, and even those who are my bosses to understand that if we are to transform medicine, because medicine and healthcare and public health needed to be transformed. So that was the birthplace of HEGIM, Health Equity Justice in Medicine, which ultimately is a curriculum, in fact, a comprehensive program that includes didactics, which is lessons, presentations, lectures, things like that, but also community engagement and advocacy with the goal of training physicians, both in training and in practice, to be able to understand that structures and systems impact the health realities of a people. And if we are to make a change in the health realities and health outcomes, we have to be engaged in making a change in the structures and systems that inform the social determinants of health that then inform those health outcomes. And so that is what HEGIM is.
So you're doing all of this, and it is magnificent that you're doing all of that. How well has it been received? Because I noticed that you attended a lot of conferences, you presented at them, and you are out there, so you're doing the work. How well, aside from the same people who you're trying to, the same subgroup that you're trying to help, Black people who are listening and attending, are you finding buy-in from the dominant group? You're saying that your professors, your mentors at the university, because you start somewhere from undergrad all the way up, and your partners in medicine at this point. That doesn't look like us as Black people. How are they receiving all of this, knowing that it's deep structural change that must be?
Yeah, excellent question. In other words, how are white folks taking what's your message? How are white people taking your message, girl? And the answer is mixed. And the answer has changed over time. So, you know, initially it wasn't well received because who wants to talk about white supremacy medicine? They're trying to learn diabetes, how to manage hypertension. Anybody trying to talk about white supremacy? How do you even spell that? You know, that type of, you know, mindset. And stop talking about race. Right? Even though it's everywhere and informs everywhere. And we're in the city of Detroit, Chocolate City, where we're taking care of predominantly African American folks and other folks of color. So so initially, yes, there was sort of a push-pull. I'm just trying to learn about the medicine and beyond with my business. But there is something to persevering and having the spirit of my ancestors who are like, we persevere, we persist, we keep on going. And won't you know, 2020, May 2020, when Brother George Floyd was murdered, and that sort of awoke the healthcare industry, as in every other aspect of society. Wait a minute, racism, it's a thing. And folks then became really engaged in like, well, I guess I need to learn about this. And now there was a little bit more interest and now more sense of, well, what do we do? How do we do it? So they became more receptivity. And now we're sort of in 2022 and we're beginning to, folks are beginning to realize that for things to change, it's not just having a lecture there, reading a book here, listening to a podcast there, watching a movie there, yay, Black History Month, or writing a policy statement. It is going to require deep institutional structural changes where power will need to be contended with, and shifts will need to happen where people are going to be uncomfortable, and and this is what's going to be required. So this is sort of like another level to sort of contend with, like, well, I get that you're going to be uncomfortable and not very happy, but this is what's going to have to happen if we are going to impact people's lives and ultimately save lives and ensure that we have healthy, well, abundantly thriving Black people in this country and beyond. So to your question, absolutely. Initially, there were challenges, but there were people, there were still sort of allies and co-conspirators, but white allies and co-conspirators. And I use that term allies loosely because I'm not a huge fan of it. But when I say allies, I mean folks who are willing to sacrifice, folks who are like, yes, I know it will cost me, but I'll do this because it's important and it matters. And this is, I get it, so them folks. But a lot of folks just didn't know what to do or how to do it, and it needed, like, some guidance, some, and also just needed some courage. I call it some ovaries. Other people say balls, I say ovaries, okay? Because the room is stronger, honey.
Yes.
Some ovaries to be able to move the needle and challenge the status quo. And sometimes, I mean, I know I am a fan of always saying it, so we're all leaders, we all have the capacity to lead and make change. Sometimes though, it is helpful to see somebody, just see an example of what that can look like, and receive the inspiration to get your own courage and move things. And I think when they see that, when they see someone like me, and this goes for everybody, not just white folks, but just everyone, someone like me that shows up, with either my afro or my head tie and my my afro prints, and with my accent, with my AAE or AAVE, depending on which one you go with, and just show up authentically, there's this sense that there is possibility. And that's one of the things for me in my own personal mission statement I wrote, is like, God, let my life, use me in such a way that I can show people what is possible, because a lot of times people dwell in the impossibility. Oh, it's not possible, this is not possible. But if we thought like that so much, this very internet we're on, this very Zoom, this very computer, it will not exist. So I always want to live my life where I am not hindered by this concept of impossibility. And where did I even get that idea it was impossible? Somebody told me, well, that's a lie. I believe that impossibility is, and I want my life to elucidate that, to illustrate that, to illuminate that, so that people can break free of limiting beliefs and know they can do something, they can make changes themselves. Because I don't have two heads, like my mama would say. Do you have two heads? I don't have two heads. Or do they have two heads when comparing with someone who has done something? Well, why haven't you done it? Do they have two heads? And it's like, no, we just have one head. But when we believe in what is possible, we can really move the needle. So that is how sort of I've shown up in these spaces and persevered through yes, challenging pushback. To your question, absolutely. But I tell you what, you just never know. If you keep persisting, you keep moving forward, you never know what is going to happen around you to begin to open doors. And, it's very, very unfortunate, very sad that it had to be Brother George Floyd's life, knowing that he's an example of so many, by the way, so many, that if we start to name, we'll not finish naming, right? But people's eyes got open, and all of a sudden they're like, hey, so Ijeoma, that thing you were talking about, you said racism, what is that? This and that. Start asking questions and seeking for themselves that dynamic change. So
let me ask you this, because one of the frustrating things that people share with me is when, for example, when these I would say it's opportunity in terms of the George Floyd situation, where it reaches and it impacted at such level for change.
Right.
But when you hear people who have lived 45, 50 years of their life in the United States of America, born and raised, considered to be part of the dominant group, white people, and they're telling you, well, we didn't know this, we didn't know that. When I ask people to describe what they feel when they hear that, and I talk about Black people, who they have doctoral degree. They've been in institutions where you cannot unseen, you hear, or you know, you hear these things. How does that make you feel when people are telling you, we did not know this? And you're talking about being educated in a society that, if anything, has been kind of maintaining and brewing this institutional racism for centuries. How does that make you feel?
You know, to be honest, because see, it's difficult. We can't have discussions about race and racism, structural racism, institutional racism, interpersonal racism, internalized racism without addressing the concept of whiteness. When we understand how whiteness has been constructed in society, that where it is really grounded in an intentional ignorance, I'm not surprised. So when they say they don't know, yes, it's a willful ignorance because it's all around them. But, but society, white supremacist systems, right? The white supremacist system that created and then upholds whiteness has created society in a way, right, through residential segregation, which also leads into educational segregation and all other forms of segregation, to really create a bubble, right, around many white people where they really intentionally, of course, don't know about the rampant oppression surrounding them. And that is the part of their socialization. You see, we are socialized into in so many ways. We're socialized along race, we're socialized along gender, along sexuality, along religion, culture, etc. And part of white socialization in this country and also beyond this country, because let us be clear that white supremacy is a global phenomenon. And so, you know, part of that, the white socialization is to ensure that they remain ignorant of the realities of their status, right, at the and what it costs. I mean, we see that today in the very aggressive attack of critical race theory and just like teaching history, period. Not even critical race theory, just American history, just teaching actual history to their children, right? We see that right now, the insistence that their children must not know what happened and they themselves must not know what happened and continues to happen, and that they lack the ability to critically analyze or have a critical race consciousness. Right? And a critical like power consciousness and how it works in society. There is a systemic and systematic insistence on ensuring that they don't know that they lack those skills, and their children, that it should be intergenerational in order to maintain the racial hierarchy that is white supremacy in this country and beyond and abroad.
So they're doing,
go ahead.
They're living,
yeah,
they're existing without us, in a sense, without acknowledging us, what the problem that is, as if you're talking about that bubble. So it's as, so you know, it's as if you have a neighbor who is just annoying and you're just going to exist and just totally ignore this person. Whereas we know racism is bigger than that. And when you see that in, for example, in medicine, when you see that there's no joy, as you said, in terms of, I'm something medically is wrong with someone and they have to go to the hospital to get the care. The amount of dread and fear surrounding that, aside from the financial, liability that's going to come to you, but just knowing that it is likely that, 1 out of the 10 doctors there may just be an African-American doctor or someone that looked like it. So that joy. So they look at everything through pathological lens, as you say, not realizing they are contributing to this problem.
Absolutely. And not just contributing, that their system is the pathology. The system they created is literally they're not contributing. Their system caused, the disease and the sickness. I'll come to that in a second, but I really love the analogy you started with the neighborhood. It is like a neighbor, a person moving into a land that somebody already was living in, right? And then moving in, built their house, and then created a siphon to plug into the neighbor's house to drag the electricity, drag the water, drag all the resources in that other house. And the children that are born in this new house grow up believing that, oh, all this electricity, all this water, all this power, all this Wi-Fi, we own it. Our parents bought it fair and square. And but the neighbor is without electricity, and they're like, this neighbor is, keeps taking all this electricity, my Wi-Fi, my water, my electricity keeps going to this house. They go to the police to report. The police is like, I don't even understand what you're saying, go back. Or the police beats you and sends you back to your house, right? And meanwhile, the neighbor is like, the neighbor leaves the house and says good morning to the other neighbor. Neighbor A that moved into land that didn't originally belong to them, didn't pay for the land, by the way, just sort of saw a empty land, moved in, built their house, and they started siphoning, these resources. And when they leave the house, they say good morning though, so they can see us. So it's not that they cannot see us, they can. Good morning. And if they see us and we're leaving the house and our dress is all wrinkled and we don't look very good because we don't have electricity to iron our dress or wash our clothes in the laundry, and we're not able to cook our food because, again, all the power is drained. They're like, I don't understand why you're looking so haggard and hungry and you can't even iron your clothes, or what is going on?
Do something, right?
Yeah, do something. Why are you looking the way you are looking? Fix yourself. Right. Pull your boots by the bootstraps. That is what it is. They can see us, but they remain intentionally ignorant to the relationship. The fact that their advantage is built upon a systemic source, a system. They have laid pipes under the ground, so it's not very visible, but the impact is visible. But the actual mechanics are not visible. They're under the ground, where all the wire cable for the Wi-Fi, for the power, electricity, all of that is siphoned straight through. And the people that live in that house, they're thin and they're haggard and they're not nourished, they're not, because they don't have the power to run their lives. Meanwhile, next door, they're having a blast and a party, and they really think they're in that house deserving. It's my intelligence brought this power and resources, my capacity. And then they create science and medicine and all kinds and industry. And, they invite their friends, come over to my largesse of resources, build your house here too. That's fine. No, it's fine. Are you sure that? No, we're good. Build it there. And they build this whole community, this whole system. They establish a way. And then eventually they even start to charge and tax the very people that they are siphoning all the resources that are informing and contributing and feeding their system where they're well nourished. They start to actually give tax to those people. Hey, do you want some of this abundance? Yeah, sure, for a fee. For a fee. And we pay the fee for what ultimately is ours. So that is this, if I was to make it in a nutshell, to borrow your wonderful analogy, that's how I'll describe it. They're not ignorant of us. They're ignorant of the relationship between them and us that has resulted in the discrepancy in wealth, in health, in education, etc. And not only that, go to the next step of even blaming us for the systems that they created and continue to benefit from, right? And blaming us for those outcomes.
So Dr. Opara, then from that, we can conclude that racism is a disease. Racism is parasitic. Yeah, because you need that source. They need, if they're getting the resources from a source, if they're taking from a source, they also need that source to thrive, right? So there's a relationship, and in medicine, I believe they call it symbiotic relationship. I don't know. I don't want to make it appear as if I am, these things, but it's as if you need each other to survive in that way. But at the same time, you're not paying attention to what the disease, the problem is, which is causing it. So it's a very good way of explaining what is happening to
What I will,
the
what I will,
minority.
absolutely. What I will amend, though, I think you got it right the first. I don't think it's a symbiosis, because symbiosis is like a partnership. Okay, I depend on you, you depend on me. We support each other, and both of us thrive. That's not what's happening.
It's
What is happening
one-sided.
is one-sided. So you
Okay,
were right in saying parasitic relationship.
perfectly.
It's a parasitic relationship. And so in order for me to thrive, right, you need to suffer. That is the relationship. That's the system that really is created. So the other side is not thriving. That's what these.
Yet, would you go as far to say, though, some will believe, some of us, because we're going to get into the question of where, even though white may not exist in a space, the white ideology persists in a space. So some may believe that there is a partnership somewhere. Yes.
I may be, but I don't understand that thinking. I can't even speak to that thinking. I'm pretty sure, because remember we said, and this we get from Dr. Kamara Jones and her definition of racism, and then classifying it, right? And so she says that, and this is my paraphrase, racism is a system, right, that values and accords value and opportunity according to phenotype, according to the way people appear, right? That does three things. It advantages one group, while secondly, disadvantaging another group systemically, and thirdly, saps the strength from society through the waste of human resources. Because this system ultimately wastes human resources by excluding amazing talent. Think about the problems we'd have solved by now, right? Just think about the continent of Africa and all that lives in there, the human capital, the intellectual capital, the resource, the natural and physical and other resources there that can pretty much, and we do power the world. We just don't get the profits from it or the credits, but that does power the world, right? Think about all the amazing people that we have been solved so many problems, but they're systemically and systematically excluded from the opportunities to do so. So if folks come and say that, well, some are benefiting, yeah, some always benefit from a system, but I want to emphasize the issue is that it's a system. So by and large, no, as a people, we're not benefiting from the system, but usually systems of oppression require some, if you like, will I say, messengers or representatives in the oppressed class to help maintain it. So you will have people that will look like us, but to your point, pretty much represents, right, that white supremacist ideology. Absolutely. We've had it from the beginning of time. We have it now, and we will have it. But what happens is that when the majority of us come together and lift up an alternate ideology, our sort of indigenous knowledge and activism, when we leverage our skills of resistance and revolution, we can build a better system. And those folks, whether they like it or not, they will come running home to mama.
Yes. And we've seen that. We've seen that sometimes where the type of advocacy that you're doing, the type of engaging people to think, to reflect, to analyze, and what is happening around them. It is catching on. And being bold, I'm going to use the word bold, because sometimes I remember one of my colleagues that, when I talk about racism, I'm tired of people telling me I'm being bold. As isn't this something shouldn't we talk about this?
It should just be, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Just be.
Why is it bold? But it's important. I think let's still honor that, right? Because what that reflects is that there is fear. We have to honor that there is fear, and rightfully so, because these systems are not cute. These systems are not like Hello Kitty. No, these systems are dangerous, and people do lose their lives.
Yes.
As you know, we tweeted out today. A number of us came together, writing a letter, really attempting to making efforts to activating, agitating, to hold institutions accountable for the harm that anti-racist activists and health equity advocates experience within their institutions. As you know, a few weeks ago, there was a whole neo-Nazi like rally or something in front of Brigham Women's Hospital. And they had the pictures of two doctors, one Black man, one white man, who have been doing health advocacy work and anti-racism work. And the woman, Dr. Michelle Morris, who has written about an anti-racist agenda for medicine and the need for medicine to transform, as through their research, they showed how racism again shows up structurally in the differential treatment of Black patients and white patients and patients of color and white patients, and their health outcomes, their life, whether they live or die, for those who have heart disease in their particular research, right? And you know, and we did not hear bar any noise being made in resistance to this voice of the neo-Nazis calling these doctors out and the work that they're doing out, laying all sorts of accusations, you know, at them. So to your point, there is danger, and I know that those doctors, as well as other health activists and health justice advocates who do work throughout the healthcare and public health spectrum. So we have nurses, we have public health folks, we have social workers, we have pharmacists, we have all kinds of folks throughout the spectrum of healthcare, not just physicians, who have done this work, social workers especially, and have been advocates whose lives have been threatened. So we know, there's one I'm thinking of who I remember needed security just to be in to show up at a conference, you know. So this work is not without harm, it's not without danger. And then the vast majority of people who suffer retaliation at their workplace. So we have to name and honor that you know, yes, when they say you're being bold, it's because people do suffer harm. We still do the work anyway, because guess what? We come from a lineage of warriors who understood risk and still did what they had to do because the cause is bigger. So yes, we are bold and courageous, but we also honor and recognize the harm, or the risk rather, that comes with this work.
And that's what draw our attention to you, because we're saying, oh my goodness, we wish we have the voice that you have. We wish we, you know, we could, but we know that we can. And I know you're going to respond in that way, that we can be, you know, conscious of the fact that it is dangerous, but at the same time, we're, you know, when we shut ourselves down, we know that it makes us sick. It's, you know, racism, living in a racist society is traumatic. It is traumatic. And you said in the beginning that this is what contributes to some of the sickness that we experience medically, you know, major depression, heart disease, all sorts of things that impact us. And when we talk about our experiences, it is a healing factor. It is a healing factor. One of my colleagues, remember, you said something, and I'm paraphrasing here, and you can say it here, when you said something like, we need to shut this shit down. And I said, so she said, I love that. And she's been using that. And I said, you need to give her credit for it. We need to shut it down. And we need those allies to do it. You're right. We need our counterparts in every single ethnic, racial category to help to do it. Because again, as you said, it's not only just racism, it's sexism. Okay, it's other. But let me ask you this question. You wrote, undeserved or intentionally neglected, excluded, and it is when you kind of answer that. Excluded, disinvested, disenfranchised, marginalized, and unresourced. Talk more about that, because people are coming to you in your hospital. You're teaching at the university. You're talking to people in these spaces. Tell us more about what you mean. Why is this happening?
Yes, absolutely. Language matters. Language matters. And why does it matter? Because language is the vehicle, and my linguists will be better at articulating this, but just to express, language is the vehicle that we use to convey our beliefs, our philosophies, our values. It creates our realities, our understanding, which then informs, you know, the way we make decisions and our viewpoints, our perspectives. Language creates reality, reality creates language, and it's this cycle that goes back and forth. Language matters. And what historically has happened when we don't have the lens of structural competency, and structural competency essentially is the ability, the knowledge, skills, and attitudes that understand that systems and structures of society inform the realities of our day-to-day. Okay, and then speak to the way we experience health, the way we experience wealth, our access and opportunities, the pathways and the roadways that inform how we experience life, and therefore the outcomes that we enjoy or not or suffer. Right? That's structural competency, the ability to understand how laws and policy, and decision making and voting patterns and all these pieces speak to our health, speak to our wealth, etc. Okay, education and all that. Okay, so my pulling that is to say, to your question, is that language and the ways that we language carry that is sort of that cauldron of power and opportunity. And what tends to happen, as I was beginning to mention, without the lens of structural competency, without the lens of critical analysis, is to language in a way that blames the survivor for their plights.
Yeah.
So we say, vulnerable populations, as if the populations just came into the world vulnerable, right? Like the world is perfect, and when they came in, they just are vulnerable, right? We use language as if, again, we say, Black people are, or Black women are killed 2 to 3 times. Black people, women, Black pregnant women die 2 to 3 times the rate of their white counterpart, as if, again, something just inherently broken about Black bodies that allow them to die early and die of preventable causes, etc. And so what that does is obscure the role of institutional, systemic, structural causes that result in that outcome that is observed. And so what has happened, hopefully in the last few years, due to the work that myself and my colleagues and my aunties and uncles and ancestors have been doing, again, whatever work we do today is standing on shoulders of great people behind us and before us, and hopefully the great people coming after us. We are laying those foundations, so we're sewing into that knitted shawl of history and story, right? But what they've also been saying is that, no, we are not broken. The system is broken, and goes back to what I was saying about the pathology is in the system.
Yes.
It's in the ways that housing is organized, education is organized, healthcare is organized, the criminal justice system is organized, finance and economics is organized, that are built and founded on white supremacist philosophy that then inform the ways that we do family, the ways that we speak, what we can use our money for in terms of commerce, the ways that we experience health, the healthcare that we have access to, and our education, and the list goes on. This is that, intersectionality piece, right? And to your point, along lines of how gender and sexuality speak to that, religion speak to that, nation of origin speak to that, all those pieces intersectionally, right? And so it is very important that we language to reflect that. And that's why I felt really inspired to tweet that when we use these words of vulnerable or underserved, that's what I wrote. And that it gets to me because it's in every paper or meeting, even interview. I just want to serve the underserved. How they get to be underserved? Why they underserved? And hey, watch this. Who is overserved?
Right.
Who is overserved?
And shouldn't that be our language?
And
we want to look at the people who are overserved to ensure that
who are
yes,
right, who are overrepresented. We talk about underrepresented. How do they get to be underrepresented? Is it magic? How they get to be underserved? Is it magic? Is it how they get to be vulnerable? No, there is a cause for this outcome, and we have to name it, so that as we name it through language, then the natural question should be like, wait a minute, you're saying this population is a population made vulnerable by systemic inequity. Well, then let's look at the systemic inequities. Let's look at those root causes. Let's funnel our attention and resources to the causes of these outcomes, and not always blaming people who are just trying to survive oppression, and remarkably well, I must say, for Black folks. It was really, by all standards, we should have been extinct. When you really take into consideration everything, the Holocaust of slavery and the Atlantic slave trade, after slavery, Jim Crow, Black codes, post-Reconstruction, and the list goes on, and post-Reconstruction and Jim Crow, and then everything else that has happened, laissez-faire. We should be extinct, but we're not. And that is, to me, the gloriousness of what it means to be Black. And so yes, sis, go ahead.
That socially constructed way of problematizing everything within the minority group, as you say. It is so difficult, though, and so tiring. I'm going to be honest with you, from my end, to, as you said, because it's the language already seeped into our psyche.
Yes.
So it saturates us because we cannot escape it. You pick up a book, it's there. It's common. And that's all, if you have students talk in your class, you're going to hear them speak like that.
Yes.
Their analytical skills doesn't go beyond. It doesn't go, it's the range is not where you're hoping it should be, right? Because we know who control the social, what we call moral shapers, moral entrepreneurs. We know who control education and who socially construct our language, the English language itself, for its interpretation to serve the dominant purpose, right? So the same books that we, they take it to and they donate to in the countries on your continent, right? And so we're reading it, we're digesting. So some of us have assimilated already to those ideology even before you enter this United States of America. So it's really tiring for us now.
Media. Let's not forget media, right?
And everyday media. And so when you want to, when we should be saying, what about the overserved? We're the outliers here, right?
Yeah.
And so, but it is so important. It's just like, with the feminist movement, where they're trying to shape the language, her in front of his, she in front of he, and then you try that maybe 1 week and then you find yourself defaulting to the social construction pattern of how our reality is shaped for us, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So you talk about racist policies and racist structural, culture that is there. How, tell us where, for example, in your institutions, because you've been in so many, and where can we identify also in public policies, organizational policy, public policies, where do you find these colorblind, racist, ideologies? Not just in textbook, but go ahead.
Right. Let me speak to something you mentioned first, and then I'll segue to this. I think what you said about how tiring and exhausting it is. I have to acknowledge that and affirm that. Absolutely, it really is. But this is the thing: if we can learn something, we can unlearn it, right? And learning and unlearning are processes. They're processes, but we got to plant the seed first in ourselves. Like, we have to always lead ourselves first. Like, I take this work so seriously and personally to me, and ensure that I am role modeling exactly what I talk. This is a work that you got to walk the walk while you're talking the talk, and still having grace with yourself to make mistakes and things of that nature. Because guess what? Me too. We are all assimilated into white supremacist, intersected, mutually reinforcing oppressive systems. Like, it's a reality. So I'm still right now, still going through every day, my own unlearning and deconditioning, decolonizing process. So I want to just lift that up, that yes, it is exhausting and it is tired, but it is worth it. Anything good in life is worth it. It's worth effort. It takes effort, and it's worth it, because the reward at the end, the outcomes are so much more powerful than any inconvenience or any sort of effort that it took to learn. If we can learn it, we can unlearn it as we gain consciousness. So I really want to encourage your audience with that, is that yes, absolutely, it's a lot. It's pervasive, it's insidious, it's ubiquitous. But I tell you what, our ancestors didn't come far for no reason. you know, if they could do it, we can do this,
Mhm.
and continue to sort of be that role model so we can unlearn and decondition. Now, to your question around the policies, again, almost similar to the language, is ubiquitous, right? From the admission process, hiring,
Yeah.
firing, evaluation, promotion, tenure, retention, right? To the pay, compensation,
Mhm.
you know, who gets recognized or not. All these policies are present. You know, how we determine who, what our sort of scoring around exams are, the
Yeah.
way we write exam questions, etc. And our educational, like, again, system, the ways that we design curriculum, right? It is that as ubiquitous and as insidious as languages, is as ubiquitous and insidious as these policies are. And the truth of the matter, to your point, is that they continue to perpetuate themselves because of uninterrupted whiteness.
Yeah.
Right? Until whiteness is lifted up and interrogated and then dismantled. And we learned that from the amazing James Baldwin in his paper, and so many other works that he's done. But the one that I recall right now is in Whiteness and Other Lies, I believe it's called Whiteness and Other Lies, an essay. And it's a wonderful essay, you know, to really explore. And until whiteness is named and you know, dismantled, ultimately, yes, it seeps into every way that we sort of politic and creates and then reinforce or enforce and reinforce, you know, policies throughout really the entire anatomy of medicine, healthcare, and public health, and as reflected in other aspects of society.
And so you mentioned about the curriculum design itself and these type of exams, for example, the MCAT, the LSAT, the questions itself, and how how they're written with such a Eurocentric frame that many who do not believe in some of the ideologies there have difficulty passing some of these tests, which they're claiming they are reassessing, and they're trying to find new ways, because some of these questions are stereotypical, they're stigmatizing, they're labeling. And so if you see them, you realize that they're continuing the racist ideology within those questions. So that's the point. There's many anti-racist, especially since George Floyd, it's become this anti-racist word has been more common now. And many universities, public schools are doing things to educate, I guess, or re-educate, or try to to get rid of the disinformation in our system. What else is out there other than the critical race theory, Abraham X book that many whites have taken on to say, well, this is more digestible to use. So let me be in the dark here, and you tell us, what do you think else is out there that we should be looking into? I mean, there's James Baldwin that you mentioned and his writings. What else?
So, hey, that's a very heavy, I mean, I would encourage people to, how do you even begin to answer that? Maybe I should start by just showing you all that is okay. So I got Resmaa Menakem's My Grandmother's Hands, Racialized Trauma and the Pathway to Mending Our Hearts and Bodies. So let me break it down into history. And so I don't know, I shouldn't say psychology, I'll just say trauma. So racial trauma, history, and then politics. I think these are the key, sociopolitics. These are sort of the three really big buckets that I would say you have to understand the history. You have to understand how things came to be, where things came from, who is who, and what did they do and why. Very critical. And then tying that into the present, okay, really important. So from a historical standpoint, and the history also, and the history, should I also say, is also begins with your own, a person's personal history, Who are your parents, your grandparents, your great-grandparents, where they come from, the land that you live on, who owns it originally, understanding one's own personal history, and then understanding again the larger history piece. So what are those history? And there are books on that I can look. We have Cast. We have the 1619 Project by Cast is by Isabel Wilkerson, 1619 Project by Nicole Hannah-Jones. We have the History of Whiteness, and there's a whole number of them. Okay, now How to Hide an Empire, and there's a whole thing. When it comes to medicine, especially, we have Superior, which is by I have to look up her name, but one of these Saini, but talking about scientific racism. We have Medical Apartheid, which is here by Harriet Washington, that talks about the history of medical experimentation on Black Americans from colonial times to present. So the history is really important. And then you have sort of like the emotional, spiritual part of things, right? Because we don't always do work just in our head. And another thing about history is pre-colonial. You got to know what pre-colonial Africa was before the coming of the white man, the way that they came, the white man and woman, because we don't let women off the hook. And so Resmaa Menakem's My Grandmother's Hands, Racialized Trauma, as I mentioned before, and Pathways to Mending Hearts and Bodies is really important as well. Killing of the Black Body by Dorothy Roberts, also Fearing the Black Body. So there's a number of in Blackness. There's a number of books and scholarship on this work. And this is just like modern. We haven't even gone as far back as, Ida B. Wells and James Baldwin and Toni Morrison and all those, all our ancestors that have done great work. But what I would say is that in medicine, for example, I think the AAMC, the Association of American Medical Colleges, have curated a whole website of resources. And we got books. I'm a real book person, but there are podcasts and there are videos. There are documentaries on Netflix. I just finished watching Amend, hosted by Will Smith a couple of days ago. That was outstanding, exploring the 14th Amendment, through which lens the lens of the 14th Amendment to view the entirety of American history and how it influenced every milestone in American history. And so again, I think that in terms of anti-racism, I see anti-racism really as a pathway to ultimately liberation, and you can't be anti-racist or understand what liberation looks like until you have an understanding of how bondage came about, what bondage looks like and means, how it manifests today, and therefore how to dismantle and end bondage to realize, liberation. So it's a lot of self-education and informed community engagement and partnerships and activism in one's own personal sphere of influence, your community, the way you vote, the way you activate and engage your representatives, the way you sort of, what activities you get into to bring your people together to represent or support certain ideologies to ensure that they have anti-racist outcomes, because racism ultimately is in the outcome, because that's where folks are like, well, it's not a racist, I didn't mention Black or white. Well, but the outcome has a differential result for Blacks and whites. It is therefore inherently racist. Change it. And so being active while being informed in the multiple ways that are available to us is what's important. So I want to sort of get away from just like mentioning these specific individuals, but really mention a mentality and approach, not just for an individual, but for institutions that to look at themselves and start with that self-reflection. Wait a minute, what do my policies, processes, practices, my people, my pay structure, what do they look like? What are the norms and culture that we value here? What are my values and virtues that and what do they represent in this institution? Are they racist or anti-racist? Because in a racist society, we can either be racist or anti-racist. We cannot be not racist or be neutral, because when we are supporting the status quo, and we have established beyond the shadow of a doubt, the jury being out in again, that the status quo is racist, is white supremacy. So if we're not racist or we're neutral, we're supporting the status quo, which is that. So we have to take a stand to be racist or anti-racist. resources to support and uphold racist policy and ideas or anti-racist policy and ideas. So institutions and institutional leaders need to lead in that way. And of course, individuals need to lead themselves and their own sort of sphere of influence in that way as well.
So you mentioned all those books, and it is up to institutions, for example, education institutions, to design their curriculum where some of these books are used or utilized in class, even the introductory courses, that are being taught to students. But for some reason, from my observation, from my circle of colleagues, they will say, for example, Dorothy Roberts' Killing the Black Body has been out there for a very long time, but it's not used as from my perception as much as we now see our Abraham X anti-racist book is used. And so the question is, why what is it that is so different about, is it because there's a 1, 2, 3 step system in there? So
I have that too. Where is it? I'm sorry.
Somebody said that it is, and there's a group of people that are actually reading it now, and they're saying it's easier digestible. So then somebody walked on and said, well, it's easier digestible because it's not really making you confront racism. And I'm not trying to review the book. These are some of the things.
I hear you. Yeah. I hear you.
So the other part that I want to mention too, in terms of changing some of the way institutions do things. Let's go to educational institution. You're part of it. Let me hear your take on how students evaluate their professors who are non-white. They're non-white professors. What are you? Do you have any feedback there from your colleagues? Because you mentioned being on the tenure track, and we know that that's a do or die type of environment. And the majority of the weight of students' evaluation is a measurement to putting you to another year of getting to tenure. So what's your take there? Because some of the changes has to be manifested at the educational institution level, because this is where students are supposed to be learning some of these deep structural issues, and they're not. Some of them are not, from what I'm gathering. And as a result, they would leave a class about Africa, related to African American studies, and they walk away with, the professor was racist, the professor didn't speak English, the professor accent is this, the professor dressing in this, the professor talks this, and nothing about the actual content or context of what was learned. So isn't that an area that needs to be addressed as well?
Oh, absolutely, 100%. Like when I talk about policies and processes, every single aspect of the anatomy of an institution needs to be excavated, because the design of these institutions, again, was built on anti-blackness and white supremacy. So there is no organ, if we pretend or we take the institution as a human organism, there is no organ, no tissue, no cellular structure, that is not tainted by, anti-blackness and white supremacy. So the system of evaluation absolutely needs to be looked at. But before I jump in there, I just want to mention something, and this is important. I have a lot of respect for our scholars that do work, and we have to understand that folks are at different stages. All folks, even Black folks, okay, and folks of color, and definitely white folks, are at different stages of their sort of anti-racist literacy, or structural competency, or racial consciousness, however, critical racial consciousness. So in my mind is that, yes, for certain people, just like we will not put somebody like in graduate level, like a PhD person or graduate level person, and if they take high school, English, they'll be like, what is this, right? Or we take a high school person and put them in PhD class, they will not be able to grapple. So I would just offer, at least from my thought, just from where I sit, that for some people, Dr. Kendi's book might be just what works for them because their level of critical racial literacy or consciousness or conscientiousness, etc., is that's what it can handle. Okay. For some people, they can't even handle that. They have to read, like, I don't know, White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo, right? Who's a white woman who does anti-racist work. And there's conversations to be had there. But, so I think that everybody is at a different level, and knowing where your level is. And there's a person, and I really am sorry that I can't name them to give them credit, but there is, I can happily send to you, there's this blue infographic that made its rounds online and certainly on Twitter. That's like it's like a circle with concentric circles, and it sort of has this pathway of like the spectrum of anti-racist sort of competency, so to speak, from someone who is very basic, who just learned how to spell racism, to somebody who can have critical analysis and like break down critical race theory, and it's like doing institutional transformative work, and that whole spectrum. So what I would just offer is that certain people are different positions on the spectrum and therefore are able to digest or process certain resources.
Are you saying regardless of the education level? Are you saying even someone who have gone through every level of every education level?
My sister, I've heard the most ignorant things from people with like 4 PhDs. Your PhD, your educational level has nothing to do with. The other day, there's a guy, I don't even want to name his name on your show because I don't want to give him but he's that publicity. But he's a prominent Canadian professor. He's well known online, and he made some of the most ignorant comments around structural racism. The other day, we did some activism work last year, real lot of work with the AMA, American Medical Association, and the Journal of American Medical Association to really call them to order and call them out and hold them accountable for their own, again, role in institutional racism. But the trigger, the spark of that was a podcast that 2 white men did, one of whom was one of their top editors, about structural racism, highly educated, highly accomplished person, older person, who totally had no clue. So my sister, I'm telling you, your educational level has nothing to do with your ability to have those critical analytic skills around race, racism, white supremacy, and learned skills. You're either going to learn it in your home as usually a Black person, or you're going to learn it if you're privileged, in your class, in your school at some level. And it has nothing, you can totally go through 6 PhDs where you're focusing on this like minute topic or area of expertise and have no clue about the world around you. So yes, I do mean regardless of educational background, I promise you.
Well said. And so the empathy, the empathy is lacking when you come in some of these areas.
I don't even, oh yeah, you mean the people who don't have those skills, who have not developed that skill set, and then they have is that what you mean? The lack of empathy from those people, or for those people? Which one?
Well, for those people who at their level of education, for example, I guess I'm optimistic thinking that, but then you said it. I'm optimistic thinking that you have gone through so many years of education at some point. Some of this about the oppressive nature of structural, policies would be, imparted on you. So I'm thinking in my mind that even the lacking that empathy and understanding them, these people who still harbor the racist belief in their mind, and so thinking that the people who are oppressed, the people who suffer are, it's their own fault. They're lacking that empathy. Yes.
Right. I completely, I hear you, but I still don't let them off the hook, okay? Because I don't think you need to be super educated to have empathy.
Exactly.
So to me, those are 2 separate things. The education piece, yes, that you don't know certain data, but empathy, you don't need to go to school for empathy. My 3-year-old has empathy for the fishies. I have a fish in my aquarium I'm looking at right now with the tumor on its head. We don't know what's going on with this goldfish, but she has empathy and she's 3. Okay, she can't spell her name. So to your point, no, that doesn't let them off the hook around empathy. But do they need a certain level of like the resource, like for those who make the decision to engage in self-development and self-learning, right? Are there certain resources that might be too heavy for them because they are still, you know, intellectually and spiritually and emotionally at, like, I call it America 101. They just need to even know like the Constitution, you know? Do they need like that, like a very basic? Yes, they might. Hopefully they master that, then they advance. It's almost like an educational like system, but for critical race, like competency and consciousness development for them. So they might need to start very basic and then advance to certain levels of information. So they're not left off the hook, sis, at all. I was just pointing that out to provide some context, maybe some understanding. Yes. But no, they are still old enough, mature enough, and accomplished enough to engage in their own self-development and not reach conclusions that have no basis. They have no concrete basis for. So I want to quickly mention, though, lift up what you talked about, student evaluation. It is absolutely a site for an anti-racist intervention. And I just to make some corrections there, I'm not, thank God, on the tenure track. I'm a clinician educator. So, you know, as a clinician, there's a different sort of track arranged for you because you take care of patients and you do your teaching and everything by the bedside, etc. So I don't have to go through that, but I still have to go through a promotion process. The tenure is for those who are tenure track. Right. And to your point, yes, you know, student evaluations are important, but I think for myself on the clinician educator track, it's not like super critical. It's helpful, but it's not as critical as maybe folks on the tenure track might be. But your point is still well standing because yes, the evaluation is different. I know as a physician who practices, you know, medicine. So even while teaching my teams, you know, by the bedside, yes, there's a whole different dynamic sometimes as a woman, and this is where the intersectionality of gender as well as race and national origin, etc., intersect. And right, the receptivity, you know, is different. It is different oftentimes, especially when the trainee is a male. I had an experience where I was a trainee. I was requesting to speak to their superior, who is my peer, to really massage a sophisticated case, and they literally asked me why do I need to speak to the superior? I could speak to them. And I you know, I had to like gather all my lives and to be like, am I hallucinating? We dealt with the situation, but again, I'm very clear that if it was a male on the voice, on the male voice on the phone, or it was a, you know, it sounded like a white American and a white American male, that the receptivity will be different. Very, very clear about that. We see that and experience that. So yes, there is that is absolutely a site for intervention. And therefore we have to develop policies that account for that understand. And there's been data that has been shown that yes, women professors, and then also women of color professors, Black women professors, receive, you know, differential evaluation from their students and trainees. So what systems need to do is, number one, create the environment where that doesn't become a thing, right? That is not, first of all, that behavior is discouraged, that we name, we shame, we out, and we talk about what that's about, and sort of the inherent biases that racial biases built inside of, again, racist structures and systems that inform you, and sexist and patriarchal structures and systems that inform you that this woman cannot be an authority in her field. Right. And then cause you to then evaluate or engage or interact with her in a certain way, or even as a male, but a male of color or a Black male, a professor, like similarly, but we know there's a whole hierarchy to that. So that's the first thing. Again, I always look to the system and the environment, that how is this behavior even occurring? Why? What are the systems that allow for this behavior to occur globally, but also locally within that institution? And then secondly, to determine that, wait, how much weight weight, therefore, should we give these evaluations, understanding that they're inherently, biased against a very key valued portion of our faculty, right? And so that's a question that then needs to be explored and sort of, turned over or flipped over in order to ensure that, again, our processes and our practices are anti-racist and equitable. So I completely agree with you with that. And that mindset is applicable across the board for various areas. Again, the whole anatomy, the whole part of the institution needs to be reviewed with a lens like that.
Well said, because you're right, you mentioned the weight. From what I'm gathering, there's a lot of weight that is placed on how students view you, and it actually impact the outcome, because that's why you may not see a woman of color in certain institutions being tenured, and you may find one off, but not many, and that is also concerning. But let me ask this: people say, well, we are talking a lot. We're talking about what we should do. We're pointing out all the wrongs of society, the structural, issues that are there. We know that, we protest, we write, we do research, we present at conferences, and so on and so forth. What else can we do?
So I'm glad you asked that question. And I'm glad you asked that question, because it actually circles back to one of the things we were talking about in a second. But I would say, just to what you were saying, I was, as you were asking, I was also, as you were speaking, I was also thinking about this last question with the student evaluations and around the system that produced that. And then also in my head, I'm like, again, we are some of the most under-mentored, under-sponsored, members of academia, right? So if you, even in the field, even in our teaching or whatever aspect of our work, right? Where a person might actually truly be struggling. I might actually be truly struggling in teaching, but in what ways have you provided support to those faculty members as an institution to ensure that they are optimized in that aspect of their work, right? And so again, the layers just keep peeling. So I wanted to just recognize that thought. But to your question, currently, it's interesting. You said something earlier, when you said shut the shit down, and and you talked about healing as well. I'm of the belief that as Black people and African people and people of African descent, we have done everything. You say we talk about the negative, and no, our lives, our very lives are examples of what is possible. We stay creating, we stay building, we embody solution and solutioning every day in our various spheres of influence and life and work, from the home to academia to business and corporate to the neighborhood to community to faith-based locations. We are always building and creating and solutioning and activating. So I think it's a false narrative to say that we are pointing out the wrongs of society. We are always, and I think MLK said this and many others said this, that we are constantly dragging America, kicking and screaming into her ideals.
Yeah.
So that is a false narrative. So I reject that already. But I do think that the role, and you said this, is that the role really of dismantling white supremacy belongs to white people. They created the shit that needs to be shut down.
Right.
And I think our role, as you said, as we survive white supremacy, that it is a trauma. It is an intergenerational trauma that is passed down through generations and experienced directly, indirectly, in multiple ways. And I really think our role is to engage meaningfully and deeply with the healing process, and to really work that healing individually and collectively to grow and transcend our trauma. I really do think so, to rest, to enjoy, to dance, to live out our abundance and our creativity. I really think that that is where we thrive. And white folks to be activated, learning the lessons that we've taught them, knowingly or unknowingly, intentionally or intentionally, right? Dismantle those systems so they can also thrive, because they're also suffering. There's this book by Dr. Jonathan Metzl, Dying of Whiteness. And there are other works that have been done that have shown that, again, white people, when offered time and time again, have chosen race above all other options, even to their detriment. And so white supremacy is destructive to all. And they need to understand that, internalize that, and reject this idea and construct of whiteness, right? And do that systemically and systematically. And really, in doing that, really to just sort of get out of the way so that we can thrive, because we're doing it. So I reject the notion around that we are fighting, and yes, we are, but at the same time, we are building. We are showing solutions. We come forth with, like, our lives represent the ability to not just survive, but thrive in the most hostile of environments. What more solutions are you looking for? So I really think that it's a reframing that we need to sort of engage in. And I think that also for us, as we wrap this conversation, is a reminder. And this is, for me, how I show up every morning, is to constantly be reminded. That's why I need my community, because sometimes I forget who I am, why I am, and who I come from, who and where I come from. Because that is the energy that I bring to this space. I'm like, oh, this has been done before. We've been known the answer. We've put it in books. We've put it in TV. We've put it on videos, in podcasts. It's everywhere. You are the one refusing to see or to use it to make change, because you want to insist on the status quo. The issue is not us. The issue is an addiction to power. So that we just need to frame to say, what else can we do? We can focus on ourselves and healing and building amongst ourselves, and going through, deconditioning the internalized white supremacy in its various forms and levels that we've all unfortunately been exposed to. It's like the contamination process, and continue to build. And one day, these white children, they may be the savior of whiteness, because as they are learning and their eyes are opening, they might be the ones to finally grab their parents by the shoulders and say, wake the hell up. We're killing ourselves, and we're taking everybody down out with us, including the planet, not just the planet and life forms. Because when you talk about climate change, there's intersectionality with environment. There's intersectionality with the capitalist system. All these pieces intersect inside of a white supremacist basin. And so the dismantling of white supremacy is in service of all. It will benefit all life forms, but folks are going to need to go into rehab for their addiction to power, frankly speaking.
Dr. Opara, you're an activist, you're an advocate, you're a teacher, you are a change agent. And, and I'm sure you're going to recognize, or you can now recognize, others who are like you. Can you point us to some? We know of them, but tell our viewers of some people who are sharing the same voice, who are active in their voice, who are action advocates in your circle, in the medical field, in other areas that we may not have heard of. We know, we can find people on social media, but who are they? We know we can come to your spaces and hear some real strong voices that makes us feel good about what we believe and what we want to do to make change. Tell us, who are these advocates out there, if you can name them?
This is a very it's a terrible question, because we'll forget someone, and it's not a reflection of their awesomeness. It's a reflection of my brain. Oh my God, this is not a good one. Oh, where do I even begin to start? Oh my gosh, I'm just gonna, because I was looking quick. Okay, let me look at a list so
people
that
in your circle, then, for example, because I know when you have your spaces, I'm seeing some excellent speakers, and I'm like, wow, we should have a conference with everybody there,
And we will. That's one of the things. And I would just, for those who may not know, and then I'll go into the names. It will also give me a chance to remember folks. So I host both on Twitter and Clubhouse, because we have an after, we call it, I call it the after party on at the club, at the Clubhouse. But every Saturday, 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we host the roundtable, which is the Anti-Racism in Medicine Action Roundtable. It's 1 p.m. Eastern Time on Twitter Space. My handle is at INNODIM, at Nnodim. You can follow me and talk to me and DM me, and I love conversing and learning from people. And so the mission of that roundtable is to, again, identify the areas of where anti-Black racism, and I'm very intentional about naming anti-Black racism, because that is the root of white supremacy, and how it has impacted the systems of medicine, healthcare, public health, as reflected by the rest of society. And so I convene amazing people that come together, are so generous with their time and brilliance to talk about these. And so some of those people include Dr. Monica McLemore. We have Lana James, who is at Ready for Black Lives. We have Stella Sappho. We have Dr. Stella Sappho of Just Equity, and she's based in New York. We have Dr. Brittany James. We have Karanja, Mr. Karanja, who's a sociologist and journalist and does great work. We have who else do we have? Also, Dr. Brittany James, by the way, is the co-founder of Institutes of Anti-Racism in Medicine. We have I'm trying to think back on a number of we have, of course, Hal and Allison, who are part of the Woke, WEOC, that is the writers and editors of color on Twitter. And there's just a whole litany. What I would encourage you to do is to please follow me, and I'll be very happy to sort of just call out all these people over time. So follow me and follow the people that follow me. We have, of course, the Blackstock sisters, Uche and Ani Blackstock, who are just powerful women. They're twins, and they do great work, amazing, outstanding work. We have people like Raymond, Dr. Raymond Graves. We have the nephrologist, who's Dr. Vanessa Grubbs. Wow. We have Dr. Ramla Kasozi, Dr. Brian Leva. There's a whole list. So follow me, and I will try to make it my business to sort of name folks, just tag folks throughout the week, and you follow those folks. We just wrote a letter, I think I mentioned earlier, really holding institutions accountable for their not protecting anti-racist activists in medicine and healthcare and public health. And so we just wrote, and that letter is off. So we're busy, and we're doing work, here and there, but it's so important that we are intentional. I'm intentional about maintaining exquisite, I like to call exquisite self-care, that I'm resting, that I'm playing, that I'm dwelling in intention, I'm practicing intentional joy. Because ultimately joy is revolutionary, and is a form of resistance. So play, rest, and joy are very critical. But these are some of the people, and there's so many more. So me not mentioning them is my brain, it's not them.
And so the reason why I asked, because sometimes you're watching these news and they bring on individuals, and I'm not saying that they're not making a point, but we need individuals who are more what is the word, shaped in these in the scale of delivering the message, and more not afraid to call it what it is in the public eye, because I do get excited when I hear these things. I do, because it gives you a reason and a purpose to talk, to share, and to want to do research, to read, to pick up a book, all those books that you mentioned, to seek out those individuals that you mentioned. So we are wrapping up, and it has been so exciting just talking to you, just sharing. I know I listen to your space, and I know you can go on and on. We can do that. And the takeaway here, that I'm getting from you is joy. I often say, practicing grace. Grace is what I lead with, and now here you are with joy, and that is something that many of us need in our lives as a form of self-care, as you mentioned. Any last takeaway? I noticed, I know we're ending. I noticed you didn't mention Tariq Nasheed, but what's your takeaway? Are you
actually,
familiar with that person?
I think, is this the FBA person? Is that correct?
You don't have to go there.
Yeah, I'm not, I've, no.
Go ahead. So what's your takeaway?
So you
What
mean
is some,
as we wrap up? So
as we wrap up?
there's a quote that I love so much, and I'll tell you why in a second once I pull, because I want to give the quote
Mhm.
exactly as, and this is a quote from my wonderful auntie Audre Lorde, who
Ah,
I'm sure many people know. Um, oh, I must have missed her for some reason. Okay, allow me. Oh, I found her. Great. Okay, good.
mhm.
Awesome. Okay. So this is a wonderful quote that I love. On being heard. When we speak, we are afraid our words will not be heard nor welcomed. But when we are silent, we are still afraid. So it is better to speak. And there's another one I love. I am deliberate and afraid of nothing. And my sort of adjustment to that is that I'm deliberate and courageous in everything, because sometimes I am afraid. I am afraid. But my thing is that it's okay to be afraid, but don't let the fear stop you from doing what you need to do. Still push through the fear and do it anyway. And that's how we build our courage muscles. So I am afraid a lot, but I do it anyway, because the value, the bigger picture, I keep my mission and purpose ahead of me, and the bigger picture outweighs my whatever quote fear that I have, which again, like people have said, fear means what fear is, false evidence appearing real. At the end of the day, that thing I'm afraid of is not even a thing.
It's not
And
even.
then people, there's another in 12-step groups, they say fear can also mean face everything and rise. So when we face, regardless of how we're feeling, we eventually, we rise, we soar, because we build that courage muscle. We're stronger, we can soar. And that courage is necessary in using our voice, because whether I speak or I don't speak, I'll still be afraid. Whether I speak or I don't speak, it doesn't change the situation that caused my need to speak in the first place. I might as well speak. So I'm saying that as an encouragement
Mhm.
to the audience and to the listeners.
Mhm.
Your voice is powerful. Oh, your voice is not by accident. I don't care if you have a deep voice, a small voice. I don't care if you're kind of quiet or you're kind of brash and bold and colorful. It doesn't matter. You're gifted. You're talented. You're blessed. You're endowed with favor. There's a special light in you that only is a problem out there only you can solve, because you have the particular mixture of gifts and talent to solve that problem. You're powerful. So it's okay to be afraid sometimes, but speak. It's okay to be afraid sometimes, but do it anyway. You're building muscle. You get stronger, and you're not alone. You're with a community, whether the community is right there with you or me who is somewhere else in Detroit, Michigan, or wherever. We are together.
Mhm.
Powerful. So I just want to encourage that. And sometimes it's just a little thing. It's
Mhm.
not, oh my God, I have to fix the world. No, 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 no. Just listen, even you're like, I'm going to read a chapter. That's something. It's something different you're doing today that you didn't do tomorrow. That's growth, right? And that information is going to inform your next actions. You're going to do something. You're going to change. It's little by slow. This is a marathon. And I said this at another podcast. I said, we are all little ripples. We think, oh, so there's a saying, African saying, a person who thinks that a small person, one person who is small, cannot make a difference, has never spent the night with the mosquito. You spend the night with the mosquito, you understand that, oh, tiny can be powerful. You see. So you start a little at a time. We are all ripples, but you see what? Our collective ripples equals a tidal wave. So it's little by slow. We have another saying, how do you eat an elephant? A bite at a time. So nobody say go out there and change the world and do all this huge, nah. It is little by slow. For me, it was just starting to teach differently, starting to just start to name, okay, thank you, student or resident, for telling me about Miss So-and-so's hypertension. What else do you think is going on with her?
Mhm.
Oh, she's not taking her medicine, but why?
Mhm.
Have we asked why? Literally, that was the beginning. And then from there grew a curriculum as I recognized a pattern that, wow, so many people are not asking why. So many people are clueless to the history of this Detroit and how did it come to be that this city has 88 or 82% African-American people. Do you understand the history of that? Do you understand those social determinants that impact their health outcomes? They're not from a vacuum. They live inside a cauldron of social forces that are informed by policies and decisions that we make every day, and so on and so forth. And the curriculum has grown over time. It is little things we do differently. First, by choosing to transform ourselves, and then little by slow where we are located. So go forth with courage. I encourage you, pun intended, to move forward with courage, to use your voice, just where you are, right? And just add your little ripple into the sea. And the rest of us that are also doing our own little ripple, it collectively becomes the tidal wave that causes change. And that's what I would leave your listeners with.
Dr. Opara, you are joyous. You educate me. You're educating a lot of us right now. And, you're blessed. And I know there will be continuous blessing. And I thank you for sharing that it doesn't matter how small, whatever the space that we're occupying, use our voices. I wanted to hear that as well. That was one of the reasons that I reach out. How do we speak up, knowing the dangers of it, and without me even asking you talk about it, the danger of it. And you mentioned, your colleagues in research who are being threatened and so on. So we thank you for that. We thank you for the poems that you share. I'm going to have to go back to it and listen to it again and use it, because I've been using some of the things I've heard you use. Maybe I have to do a collection of, sayings by Dr. Opara.
Oh, I would love that. Oh, that would bless me so much.
Yes.
That would bless me so
I'll
much.
capture, because you've been saying something interesting, and maybe just create a Twitter account for that.
Oh my God, Dr. Opara says, oh my God, you don't understand. I will take it to my father. He's a Nigerian that is like, Ijeoma, what are you doing with your life? Don't worry, let me show you this Twitter account.
Exactly.
Open for me.
And you said something important about, asking why, especially when you're working, with students or patients, the value care approach that has been attached to the Affordable Care Act. I don't know if you know about it. I know we're wrapping up, but I needed to say this. President Obama said we need to add more value to the care, or that we're giving, and putting there in quotation there, because we need to spend more time asking questions of the clients that you're serving. And a lot of people do not like that, because they prefer the 5 minutes in 1 hour waiting room, 5 minutes with a doctor, and then you're out. Versus spending time asking questions. And you learn so much, as you said, you learn so much. Why aren't you taking your pills? And you continue to until you find out. So being informed, and informing your patient, and you yourself, can be informed, because in the end, they are the expert in what they're experiencing.
Absolutely. And let me tell you a saying I tell my patients. I tell them, I call them, because almost all my patients are Black, 95% and more. And so I'm like, sis or brother, I'd be like, look, you are the chief executive officer of your health. You're the CEO of your health. Yes. I'm your CMO, your chief medical officer. But you are the expert of your health, of your story, of how you came to be. And I'm expert of medicine and medical science. But you see, neither is complete until we come together. So we work together ultimately for their health, respecting, each other's expertise. But absolutely, people are the experts of their lives. And to your point, yes, the value, asking the questions opens up that expertise, and then informs our expertise in order to uphold their life and wellness. And from a system standpoint, having healthcare systems that respect that and reward and incentivize that is very key. And I would say this on behalf of my colleagues, most of our colleagues, that's what we want.
Definitely.
Because forgive me pinging away, because ultimately that's what we want, because that the 5 minutes and basically the capitalist model, right, of healthcare is not benefiting anybody. People are burning out, people are tired. We saw how it broke down with COVID, requiring the practically government bailout. Okay, so it's not a sustainable model for anybody, both healthcare professionals and patients and community as a whole. So you're absolutely right. Building robust, resilient systems that reward and incentivize human-centered care is good for all. Absolutely.
Dr. Opara, you have the last word there. Thank you. You've given us the tool. So we have enough, we can use it. So thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Bye, everyone. See you on Twitter and Clubhouse and Instagram.
We will. We definitely will.